Hello! Welcome to DIY is my happy place. I'm Amy, and today is the day I've been planning for a long time. Today's tutorial is my favorite DIY I have ever done. Now, I've said that about a few things because I have quite a few favorites, stairs being one of them. But by far, hands down, this one really is my favorite tutorial of all time. In order to show how it's done, I had to do a pretty long video. So I want to tell you one thing. Did you know that YouTube has an option where you can fast forward or slow down videos? I do it all the time. I watch tutorials to learn how to do just about everything. Anything I want to learn, I learn on YouTube. And there's so many times when the speed isn't exactly perfect for what my needs are. Sometimes I want it to go faster. Sometimes I need it to go slower. You can choose to go faster or slower. And in this case, you might want to go faster so you can see everything that I do in a faster motion. I will end up sounding like Alvin and the Chipmunks. Or like, if you slow it down, I'll sound like the teacher from Charlie Brown. Remember her? But either way, it can make it so that your time is used at the best capacity for you. But anyway, let's talk about what my favorite all-time tutorial is. That is my kitchen renovation. I have tried to figure out, I did this about 5 years ago, and I tried to figure out my total cost for the things that I'm going to show you today. And I was new at this whole videoing. I just started videoing and I wasn't keeping track of all my receipts. But I will say this, it was reasonable. A lot cheaper than it would have been if I would have hired it done. Oh, and I forgot to mention, this Thursday night, we're going to have a live, and it's going to be a blast, 7 o'clock Central Time. So don't forget to join us. So having said that, if you want to see my personal favorite tutorial of all time, my kitchen renovation, let's have some fun. This is what my kitchen looked like when we bought our house. It looks very brown, formica, drop-down ceiling, the white appliances, I mean, everything about it. I just wasn't digging. And little by little, I've been renovating. So I'm going to show you how that all came about. The first thing I did was painted all my cabinets white. And I definitely needed a new sink. It's funny because when we bought the house, they'd put this new sink in and this new formica. So this is not that old, but it was just ugly, unsightly. The sink was made of plastic. I mean, it was just a house flipper, and somehow they thought this was a good look. And yes, painting the cabinets white and getting a microwave that was stainless steel helped a lot. Stainless steel dishwasher and fridge. But it doesn't help that brown laminate. Now this is in the dining room, also brown laminate. I had considered knocking all of this out and opening it up, but then I changed my mind, and I'm actually pretty glad I did. And let me show you how it turned out after I did my thing to it. This is my inspiration photo. If I had all the money in the world, this is what my kitchen would look like. But since I'm going to be DIYing this, I wanted to figure out how I could do this marble tile backdrop and marble countertop look, but on a tight budget that I make up myself. The first thing I did was walk up and down the aisles at Menards, looking at products that I could maybe turn into a faux marble backsplash. And I came across these boards, and they were very reasonably priced. Now, I did this almost 5 years ago, and I believe they were between $5 and $10 a board. They're pretty large boards, and I figured, okay, let's see if I can paint this with a faux marble look. And I will say that I got a lot of my ideas from stone coat countertops. and I'll talk about that more in a minute. But the first thing I did was I painted all the boards with just regular latex paint, a gray color. Then got out the white spray paint to give it an iridescent kind of cloudy look across it. Painting the veins on the boards to look like marble took a bit of a learning curve for me, if I'm being honest. I'm not real good at that kind of stuff. And so whenever I didn't like how it looked, I would just paint over it and start again. So it took me a few times. There definitely was a learning curve to get it how I wanted it. The first few tries, I took a stick and just drizzled across the board with different shades of gray and white paint, and then kind of just flattened them out a bit with a roller. When I'm flattening it out, I'm not giving full pressure onto it. And then after that, you can just try different paintbrushes, different colors of gray. You just want all different shades of gray in there. And paintbrush on the very top of those lines, just kind of turning and turning, gives it that wispy look. And I just kept going over and over until I got the look I wanted. Actually, eventually I even thought, oh, this is a little darker than I even wanted. I want it lighter. And I had my ideal picture right next to it. So if I'm being honest, I painted over them a few times until I got it how I wanted. Once I was happy with the look of the paint, then it was time to get my favorite epoxy, which is Stone Coat Epoxy. And I will say this, do not do an epoxy job that's large like mine without watching a lot of tutorials from the Stone Coat Countertop YouTube channel. Now, this of course is a tutorial, but I am no professional. This is the first time I've ever done countertops. So I watched one video after the next to make sure that I had all the techniques down based on what it was I was doing. So that's definitely what I would recommend for you to do as well. Make sure you watch their tutorials because they are the professionals and they do a lot of them. And this is not sponsored by them. It just happens to be the epoxy that I use, and it's one that you can order online. I have done quite a few different epoxy things. I've done 2 or 3 dining room tables. In fact, that is my very first YouTube tutorial I ever did, was my dining room table, which is holding up fabulously still. In fact, that dining room table is underneath the green plastic cover right there as I'm working on this epoxy job. Okay, so let's talk about what we did. In order to get to this point, get 2 parts of epoxy. And this is epoxy A and epoxy B that have to be mixed up very well. I get a paint stirring stick and put it on the end of a drill and really stir this up for 2 or 3 minutes until it is 100% for sure, without a doubt, evenly mixed, because epoxy is very tricky. If you don't mix it perfectly, you'll have soft spots in your epoxy. Once you've mixed the epoxy, set the stirring stick aside where it can drip off to dry. Don't try to clean it because epoxy cannot be cleaned off a stirring stick. To apply the epoxy to the boards, I'm going to do very thin coats. So I'm going to use these foam roller, and I actually picked those up from the Dollar Tree, to roll this epoxy on. I want it to be just a little thicker than what I would do if I was putting polyurethane on. A backsplash does not need to be really thick like the countertop will need to be, because really you're not cutting or anything, you're just occasionally wiping and cleaning it. Now here's the thing that you need to remember if you're doing epoxy, and that is you really want to work it through. You work it around. It doesn't dry as fast as a polyurethane, so you have plenty of time to just keep on working it, and you go from one direction, then the other direction, and then the other direction. You just keep on going until you get it nice and evenly put on. And in this case, I'm just moving from one board to the next to the next. And you definitely want to have this in a room where there are no pets, nobody's moving around. It's fully dusted, because any kind of dust particle or lint that floats through the air, it's like epoxy knows it's there and it says, "Come to me," and it grabs it, and then it's permanently embedded in your project. So whenever you're working with epoxy, turn off your air, turn off your heat, don't let anybody in the room, and just make sure that you can keep it completely free from any kind of debris. And then it goes on pretty. This is just so satisfying. And to see my veins underneath that I painted myself, I mean, it's fantastic. Now, you do need to give it a good amount of time to dry. Like I said, it does not dry as fast as polyurethane. So it needs to be able to be completely level and in a place where it can dry. This is what my rule of thumb is. I always let things dry overnight when it has to do with epoxy. And epoxy knows if you try to hurry this step, and it will bite you if you do. So I might be using the wrong kind of verbs, but the point is, don't rush it. If you've gone to all the trouble of doing all this, give it the time that it needs. Now, the other thing I like to do is, once I get it down, then I get a heat gun and blow on it, and it helps to take out any bubbles, and it helps to move it, to flatten it in case there's a high spot or a low spot. And it's really a good idea to do this when it is very broad daylight. Don't try to do this in the evening hours when lighting isn't very good. You want to be able to see if you've missed a spot and if it's all level. I like to get down eye level and look across it to see if there's any spots that I couldn't see from straight on up above, and then I can fix those at that time. I will say this is one of the most satisfying things, and I just love how it started coming together. I had no idea how much I would need, but I decided I was just going to do a bunch, and if I had extra, I'd figure that out on the other side, but I didn't want to have to come back. So luckily I did plenty of boards. I think I did 10 boards. Then I borrowed a table saw and cut my boards into tile size shapes. And as you can see, I'm not a professional woodworker, but it cuts so easily because the epoxy is very thin and the boards are thin. And they cut like butter. It's just a matter of having a nice straight edge. And then once I cut those into the strips, then I can go back and cut them into the rectangles that I am anticipating for my tile job. And I'll tell you, once I started getting to this point, the excitement just started to really come up. Like, I'm doing this. I'm going to have this wonderful looking backsplash, and the amount that it's costing is, I can't even guess what it would really cost to have somebody come in and do it and to have it in marble. I'm sure it's above the 50,000 mark. I don't know. I'm guessing, but it's a lot more than what I'm paying, I'll tell you that. These boards I got 10 boards. Even if they were $10 a board, I'm at $100. And then with $100 worth of epoxy, let's just call the backsplash $200. My paint I actually got from a paint store that I was able to get from Mist Tints, and I just got a little bit of black, and I took some gray and I just kept adding a little bit of black to make it 3 different shades of gray. So all in all, not bad. Now I got to prep the wall for my backsplash. So goodbye to this weird trim backsplash. I don't even know what. I had no problem ripping that off and saying, bye-bye, you are no more. And now it's time to prep my countertops. The first thing that I need to do to get my countertops ready for their epoxy job is to sand them down, because I want to make sure that the paint will adhere. Now, I did go ahead and buy the prime. There was a certain kind of paint that the Stone Coat countertop people said to use to prime your countertops, but then it was getting a little expensive. I only did it on one spot, and I just decided, you know what, I'm just going to use regular paint. Like, what really could go wrong? And guess what? My regular acrylic paint worked just fine. So there we are, saving money again. Now, I pre-painted my walls the color that I wanted, all except for where I knew I was going to be applying backsplash. There was no reason to do that there. I did have a piece of Formica that was left in the garage, and I used it to help me when I sprayed. So once I got the entire countertop with my base sprayed, or base gray, then I could get my spray paint out. Now, because I'm doing all this in the house, this is when you do ventilate. You want to have doors, windows, everything open so that you're not breathing in those toxic smells. And I have everything plastic everywhere so that it's not going to get spray paint everywhere. And I'm just using this as a guard to keep the spray paint where I want it. Now, I'm not worrying about my sink because I know my sink is going to be replaced. So I don't care about overspray going onto my sink. But I didn't want it to get up on my cabinets or any, hardware. And so anyway, now that I was a professional, of course, from my backsplash, I used the exact same technique to make the wispy, cloudy look on my gray countertop, and making sure that you paint the sides as well as the tops so it looks like one solid piece of marble. Now that I got my countertop prepped, I'm going to go ahead and do the marble veins after I put on the backsplash. Putting on the backsplash was a learning curve. I originally started trying to use regular mud that you would do with any type of tile job, but that really didn't work with my wooden boards. They were just warping and popping out, and I think I got about 5 tiles on before I realized, oh no, I got to come up with something new. So I quickly wiped off the mud, wiped off my boards, and went back to the drawing board. I went and I found this double-sided adhesive tile mat. Now, this stuff was golden. It absolutely worked perfect. So easy to use. The only problem with it is it's a bit expensive, and I don't know any other way to cut the corners when you're doing this type of tile. So expensive in that is a lot more money than it was to do with mud, but the fact that I created my own tiles and I'm getting this marble look, and I just used that double stick tile tape and then started applying my backsplash, and how happy I am that it actually worked. I will say there was one other thing that I didn't think about, and that is putting the spacers behind the outlets to move them out so that they would be level with the tile. So I had to go in and do that afterwards. So note to self, next time, bring your outlets out. They need to have a little space behind them. I will say I'm so happy with how the tile turned out. Then I decided I'm going to try grouting it. And I didn't know how this was going to work, and I hoped it wasn't going to pop those wooden tiles. But I put it on like I would a regular ceramic tile, and then wiped it off very gingerly so it wouldn't scrape my epoxy. And lo and behold, it worked! Yay! Once I got all the tile up exactly how I wanted it, I was ready to start veining. And this time I did the same thing, sometimes with sticks, sometimes with paintbrush. Let me show you how I do with the paintbrush. I just put it down, and then you just twist and twist and twist the paintbrush as you go along and it starts to look very feathery. In fact, I saw a tutorial where they actually used a feather. I didn't find good results with a feather. I definitely did better with sticks and good old paintbrush. And then I just kept on going over the same vein lines with 2 or 3 different shades of gray and white. Now, it takes a while, but again, I had to just keep thinking, okay, even if it takes me 3 hours to paint my entire countertops, I have a huge area that I'm painting that is still going to save me so much money, and I'm going to get the exact look that I want. Here's another inspiration photo that I saw that I was kind of looking at some of their veining, although theirs is a little bit darker than what I wanted, but I looked at it as I was painting my veins on to just kind of see what a natural marble look would look like. And so I definitely recommend that you print out a copy of marble that you like and keep it very handy while you're painting. Now, I am not a professional painter. I can't even paint a stick man without it looking ridiculous like a 5-year-old did it. So the fact that I was able to pull this off was nothing short of a miracle. I absolutely love it. When I got finished, once again, I was thinking, oh, I wanted it a little bit lighter. So once again, I spritzed it with some cloud cover with my white spray paint. And then voila, I finally had the final product of what I wanted it to look like. Now, in some lights, it looks pretty white or light gray, and you hardly even see the veining. And the good thing is I knew that once I put the epoxy on, it will help it to pop out. Like, you're going to see it more just with the glassy look of the epoxy. But regardless, I really decided that I wanted my countertops to be more subtle than my backsplash. So that's the look I went for. And then it's time to start really making sure this is the look that you want. Because once you put epoxy on, there's no turning back. You could go over and over with the paint until you have it exactly how you like it. But again, once you epoxy, it's going to be a big commitment because the epoxy is not as easy to change out. It is possible, but it's still not as easy. Now, for this great big large job, I decided to use a big roller, and I definitely like the sponge rather than your regular paint roller because I want absolutely no lint. And at this point of the game, everything in the whole house needs to be cleaned and vacuumed. And once again, you make sure there's no dust particles anywhere. Close all the doors and windows. Turn off your heat and air. And just get it ready to handle epoxy. And once again, we need equal parts from both A and B, and then mixed up really well in order to get the consistency that we need for our epoxy. Make sure there's not even one little speck of anything in it. Then we get out our handy dandy tool and away we go. This is so much fun. I love this. Now, I do mix only enough to go for one section at a time. Don't try to pour it all at the same time, or you won't be able to get it leveled out before it starts to set up. And the other tip that I would give you is to plan on having 2 coats of epoxy. So you do one coat one day, you let it dry overnight, and then you do a second coat the next day. It always needs a second coat, and it knows if you try to go without it. All right, it's game time now. There's no turning back. Once you do that first little drizzle, you're like, okay, let's hope this works. And it is going to work. Now, you do need to work it in. You want to work it all directions. Again, You don't want any spot that's low or high. And the beautiful part about this is if I bump into my backsplash, doesn't matter because that's epoxy too, and it's not going to make any difference. You do want to make sure that you get all of it evenly laid down, and make sure you get the sides. And then once you see that it's completely level, go over it again, because it's not. You just think it is, but it isn't. Trust me, it isn't. And then when you're sure it's level, go over it again. I cannot believe how many times I went over it. And then after it dried, I looked and I saw, oh wow, there's a low spot, there's a high spot. Okay, the other thing that you do need to do whenever you're working with epoxy is, and you're doing like this, when I did my thin epoxy for backsplash, it wasn't dripping off because it was thin, but this is a nice thick layer. So you need to have a paint stirring stick handy, and anytime it starts to drip over the edge, which it will, it always does, and if it doesn't, you didn't do it right. But you need to scrape the bottoms, and you keep on scraping for at least 2 hours. You got to be right next to your epoxy. You can leave it for 10 minutes and then come back, and then you scrape all the bottom of the entire countertop again and again, because you don't want little drips of epoxy coming down. And trust me, sanding epoxy drips is not an easy feat. So much easier just to do it while you go. Then get out the heat gun or torch and blow out all the bubbles. It's so therapeutic. I wish I could. I just couldn't get the camera to catch what this looks like. But as you're going, you'll see all these little tiny bubbles everywhere. And the heat gun just immediately pops them and melts them all. And it just becomes this glass top. It's fabulous. Go over the entire area. Then immediately go over it again and again. And I probably went over it 4 or 5 times every single section, just to make sure there's no bubbles hiding anywhere, because they will be the death of you. You'll be thinking, wait, I did all this and now I have all these bubbles. And trust me, even after I went over it all these times, after it dried, there were still some bubbles, but that's okay because I'm putting on a second coat. That's the reason you need the second coat. Then once you go over it the second coat and you do all this, then you don't have that. You just have a nice glassy surface. It is so fantastic. Now, if you don't love the high gloss look, you can sand it down and buff it and to make it a more of a matte look. I personally decided, I think I'm going to go with the high gloss for now, and eventually I may buff it down. And that's been 5 years ago, and I still haven't buffed it down. I guess I'm a high gloss gal. And for everything else I do, I always do. Like, I like matte finish for things, but I kind of want my countertops to stand out. So for me personally, I went ahead and went with the high gloss. Once it's all done, do not touch it to see if it's dry. Trust me, it's not. You have to let it sleep. Let it have a full 12 hours before you touch it. And again, for at least the first 2 hours, you have to keep scraping that bottom anywhere where it's dripping. And if I haven't said so before, make sure you have plastic everywhere and plastic on the floor where it can drip off. What I do is I put my plastic and then have it come out on the bottom so that it can just drip down and for sure not get on the hardwood. I got one little drip on my hardwood, and that was a trick to get off, I'll tell you. So you just want to make sure you have plastic everywhere, and then you can be so happy with your work. See how you can barely see the slight veins in there. It's very subtle. I finally took out that ugly sink, and I will be replacing that with a fabulous one that I got on sale at Menards. And as you can see, as this is starting to dry, you can start to see little dents because this is my first coat. So once the second coat goes up, Oh, it's so happy. Okay, now, one other thing that you need to know, it takes a full 30 days to 100% cure. You can start within 3 or 4 days doing some light things, just making a sandwich on it or whatever, and you can wipe it clean. But you don't want to do full-on cookies or anything for at least 30 days because it does need quite a while to cure, and you don't want to mess it up once you get it because, oh, it's just so nice to actually have it done. Wait to pull your plastic until you're 100% sure it's exactly how you want it. If you still see some high-low levels, it's a good thing to sand in between the first and the second coat to get off any little bumps or whatever. And then the second coat, for some reason, it just goes so much better. Number one, you know what you're doing. And number two, the epoxy just is easier to level out when it's on other epoxy. So that's why you absolutely want to plan to have enough to do 2 coats. And if it's still not exactly how you want, you could possibly even do a third. That would be fine. But after you've put all this effort in, it's worth getting that finish right so that you'll be happy with the results. I can't believe I did this. I can't believe I made up the idea for the backsplash and it actually worked. It was just thrilling to be able to complete this project. When I look at the details of the inspiration photo and how I was able to take a picture from a magazine and zoom in close and figure out what it looked like and then duplicate it and yet make it my own as well. Oh, I just can't believe how happy I am. The one thing that I did wrong was I didn't follow my own counsel and keep working for 2 hours to catch those drips on the very bottom of the countertop. So I had to sand those off later, and so don't do that part and make sure you wipe those off. It's very simple and can be done with a wooden paint stirring stick if you do it before it dries. Then to complete the transition from the backsplash to the countertop, I applied some waterproof silicone and wiped that off with my finger to make a perfect straight line. And finally, I waited 30 days for it to cure before I rolled out cookie dough. But eventually, my little helper and I could start doing full normal activities on this countertop. Now, I'm not saying we didn't use the countertops for 30 days, because we did. We just didn't put our air fryer and our knife set and all of those things on until after it had the full time to cure. Are you eating them? And now this is the gathering place in our house where we all go to cook, bake, and have a lot of fun. After I got my backsplash, my countertops, and my new sink, I realized, oh, there's still one thing driving me nuts, and that's the overhead light. I pulled out the little plastic covers to see what all was up there and realized I gotta change this out. There's just no way, and I ended up watching some tutorials and learning how to do recessed lights instead. And I even added pendant lights over the countertop to give it one last little piece of jewelry, is what I like to call it. And then voila, finally, I have the kitchen of my dreams. And the dining room counter I left in, we use that all the time. It has become my serving buffet or office, or, well, let's just put it this way. I'm so glad I didn't knock that out. And I can finally be so happy with what I have. I did put in new hardware on the cabinets, and then now I can decorate it for any holiday or have it plain. It doesn't matter. It just makes my heart sing to be able to recognize that I did a hard thing, but on a tight budget. So, what do you think? Would you try to do something like this? If I had it to do over again, would I do it again? Oh, I don't know. I'm so happy that it's done, and I'm so glad that it didn't break the bank. But now that I know how much work it really was, and it was a lot of work, yes, I would definitely do it again. Best project ever, for sure. And I still sometimes think I might buff down those counters and do a matte finish, but so far I'm still going with the high gloss. The beautiful thing about epoxy is we cut on this. I mean, you don't want to do anything more on epoxy than what you would do on marble or other types of stone. You want to be careful. We use cutting boards generally, but every once in a while somebody doesn't, and we get a cut mark on the epoxy. But what's crazy is it still kind of sort of fills in, or somehow we just lose the mark, and I can't see the cut marks anymore. It's just crazy. I don't know. It's a miracle. So yes, I have my before ugly brown terrible kitchen that I absolutely did not love, and it was my least favorite room in the house, and now I have my favorite room in the house. What do you think? Would you ever dare take on backsplash and painting your countertops? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know what you think. I didn't put up this tutorial for all these years because I wanted to make sure it would really hold up and it would really work. And the fact is, I did this 5 years ago and it's still working. None of the tiles have popped off the walls, and everything really did go as I had hoped. In fact, I am now considering repainting my cabinets because I'm ready for a change again. But those countertops and backsplash, they're staying the same. They are still my absolute all-time favorite. So what do you think? Are you inspired? Are you ready to paint those ugly countertops and make your own backsplash? I'm telling you, you could do any style. Pick a style that you love, learn how to paint it, and make it happen. It is a wonderful renovation. And I'm so thankful for all my subscribers. Thank you so much. And I will see you again soon. See ya.